just a quick reminder, we are just closing the polls in 10 minutes. So if you haven't done so already, please do share your answers and we will be announcing the results at the end of the live broadcast. And now for the final session of this 2-day broadcast, we have a live panel discussion with Willem Mutsaerts, Chief Procurement Officer and Chief Sustainability Officer at Givaudan, Sam Kimmins, Head of I100 at the Climate Group, and Patrick Horka, Practice Lead of Renewable Energy Services at Solpol, speaking on how additional investments and PPAs policies can accelerate the energy transitions. So over to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Anna, and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Accelerate Corporate Renewable Energy Purchasing. Today, we'll start with a quick introduction of the panelists, a little bit more in detail, so you know actually with whom you talk with. I will give a quick intro into the topic. So why are we actually discussing today about accelerated renewable energy purchasing? We will have a 20 or 25 minutes discussion with the panelists, and in the end, we have some time for Q&As. So as Anna said, I'm Patrick Horka. I'm heading the Renewable Energy Solutions practice at Southpol, and I will moderate this session. In my practice, we help corporates to develop renewable energy strategies and to execute such strategies, such as implementing PPAs and delivering energy attribute certificates. Southpol is a leading provider of global climate change solutions and services with more than 300 experts across 18 offices worldwide. Now to my first panelist, Willem Mutsaerts. Willem joined Givaudan 30 years ago. He worked in the APAC and EMEA region and took over several roles before he was appointed to become head of global procurement and a member of the executive committee 2015. He took on additional responsibility as head of global sustainability as of 2017, and that's why we invited him today as a panelist to drive Givaudan's ambitious sustainability approach. And we hear a little bit more about this ambitious sustainability approach later in the panel. Then we have Sam Kimmins, our second panelist. Sam is head of I100 with the Climate Group. I100 brings together the world's most influential companies committed to 100% renewable power. Over his 25-year career, Sam has led sustainability projects across different businesses, including shipping, aviation, and construction. Prior to leading I100, Sam spearheaded Forum for the Future's Sustainable Shipping Initiatives. So now why are we having this panel discussion today? Actually, just last week, there was an announcement that for the first half of 2020 and for the first time ever, Europe generated more electricity from renewable energy sources than from fossil fuels. 40% of electricity has been generated from wind, solar, hydro, and bioenergy, whereas 34% has been generated from fossil fuels. Just 5 years ago, coal generated twice as much as wind and solar combined. So that's a very fast transition into renewable energy. A recent study by Imperial College London also showed that investments in renewable energy yield vastly better returns than fossil fuels. The LCOE of solar and wind is now below new coal power plants and sometimes even below operational coal power plants. But the total investment volume is still nowhere near that required to mitigate climate change. So to hit the 2 degrees target, annual investments in renewable energy need to at least double. Corporates are gearing up and will play an increasing role to accelerate the energy transition. 224 corporates already signed I100, and we have many more also signing the science-based targets. All of them will need to source renewable energy. So today, with my panelists Sam and Willem, we'll discuss how corporates can further accelerate renewable energy procurement and directly contribute towards a net zero society. So first, I will let Willem take over the floor and present the progress of Givaudan towards I100, and I will share my screen so he can share his achievements so far.
Okay.
Over to you.
Thank you, Patrick, for this introduction and very exciting and an important topic. So you can go to the next slide. So for those who don't know Givaudan, we are a leading fragrances and flavor company. We sell ingredients used in the products that we all use every day, to make them taste and smell good. These are household products like laundry detergents, floor cleaners, liquid detergents, but also fine fragrances and drinks and other food products. We are a B2B company, so the brand name is not necessarily known globally, but we have a 25% market share. So there is a good chance that already any of you today was in touch, directly or indirectly, with an ingredient from Givaudan. Globally, we have more than 200 locations, and we are a 250-year-old company. So topics like renewability and sustainability are very critical for us, because we have a long-term vision, and our ambition is for the company to prosper for another 250 years. The next slide, please, Patrick. So our progress when it comes to the renewable energy journey, and some key learnings of tips and ideas, starting with our own journey. So our own commitments have been inspired by our own purpose. And the purpose that we launched is to create for happier and healthier lives with love for nature. Let's imagine together. And one of the key pillars of the purpose is a nature pillar. And we have set a bold ambition to become climate positive before 2050. And climate positive in our nomenclature means including scope 1, 2, and 3. And as part of the RE100 commitment, we have a target to be 100% renewable by 2025. And this is all supported by our recent announcement with our ambition to become a B Corp certified. So we are just starting also in this very exciting journey in addition. Next slide, please. So with this renewable energy journey, we started with our baseline of 2015. You see a snapshot here of the progress we have made so far. We have by 2019 achieved 75% of our electricity renewable. This is 24 of our 44 production sites, powered by 100% renewable sources. So you see we are well on track to meet our 100% renewable electricity 2025 target, with great support also of the RE100 guidelines organization to help us making the right decisions. Next slide, please. So, you know, to share with you highlights, our learnings and our ideas is that before you start, you have to know what you want to achieve and set a clear strategy. That's obviously, everybody says, well, I could have written that, but it's not always what happens in reality. Collaboration inside and outside of the organization is critical, because inside you have to deal with many stakeholders, not only the people, you know, the obvious one like the engineers and the sites, but also the controllers, financial people, salespeople. So you have to have the internal buy-in. And obviously externally, you know, don't try to reinvent the wheel yourself. There's many organizations that are on this journey and that are willing to help you to be more successful. In our situation, number 3, I said, we have to think big and be ambitious. Obviously, if you go on an unknown journey, it's scary. A lot of things you don't know in advance, but be ambitious and be bold, because that's where you have the biggest impact. And the last one is really, you know, get inspired. Look what others are doing. There's many good examples. And one of the reasons that I present today is to also to stimulate and to motivate you and to have an open door policy for other people who are starting this journey, who are on this journey, to have an open exchange, because together we have a higher impact. So for the moment, I will leave it here with the introduction of the company and our journey so far.
Thank you. Willem, and now I will hand over to Sam. And please unmute your mic.
Thank you very much. Yeah, sorry. Thank you, and thank you for that that introduction, Willem. And yeah, just Givaudan was one of in the first pioneering members of RE100 back in 2015, when it was considered utterly impossible, and everybody went, "Wow, that's real leadership joining at that point." So thank you for being one of those pioneers who have enabled now 252 companies to sign up to RE100. Next slide, please. So RE100 brings together the world's most influential companies to committed to 100%, committed to sourcing 100% of their electricity from renewable sources. This is for own operations only, rather than not supply chains, but increasingly companies are reaching into their supply chains to ask them to also make the RE100 commitment. Next slide, please. So this is the current membership of RE100. We are going to need a bigger slide at some point. 252 of the world's largest companies are now committed to 100% renewable electricity through RE100. And what is unique about RE100 is the level of credibility that we give to those companies. So the companies report every year their progress, and they have to follow rules of how they are achieving 100%. I'm not sure if the notes are coming up on other people's screens, but it's up 252, not 152 members, as the notes may suggest. Next slide, please. So why are companies committing to RE100? Why does renewable electricity make sense? Well, renewables are a great place to start on your journey to zero carbon, net positive, etc., because it makes business sense as well as being the right thing to do. The cost of solar, the cost of wind, and the cost of batteries have fallen dramatically, as you can see from this slide, since 2010, and they continue to fall. So the business fundamentals are absolutely there. There is a lot of geographic variation, which we'll touch on in the discussion, but the fundamentals are there. The cost of the technology is declining, and in much of the world, renewables are now cheaper than coal for producing electricity. Next slide, please. So how does RE100 create change? How are we accelerating progress? Well, for a start, the companies that are joining RE100 are actually buying renewables at scale through a number of different means, the increasingly favouring power purchase agreements, which is direct purchases from a renewable electricity supplier. And you can see the growth of power purchase agreements worldwide here have been growing exponentially. You can see the start of that hockey stick curve. And again, this is an indicator that the companies aren't just wanting to do the right thing. This makes business sense to buy renewables. Question mark on 2020. Let's see what COVID does to the renewables market. Currently, things are looking positive. The next slide, please. So another way that RE100 works is by bringing together the aggregated demand of our members and amplifying their voice to make sure that markets around the world are opening. 2 years ago, probably our biggest scale success was to achieve the removal of barriers to power purchase agreements across Europe and adoption of effective renewable energy electricity certificates across Europe as part of the RED II Renewable Energy Directive package in Europe. And that was it's mandated that all countries across Europe must remove barriers to power purchase agreements. So a real game changer there. We're seeing policy change happening now in Japan, and the Korean Green Deal specifically mentions RE100 as a driver for change. So real global change happening because these companies are making big commitments. Governments are taking note and seeing the win-win-win of companies investing heavily in renewables. Final slide, please. So it's just to show you the scale of things at the moment. 31 companies joined RE100 since the beginning of lockdown at the beginning of this year, beginning of COVID lockdown. So we're seeing not a slowdown, but actually an acceleration in commitment by companies, with 252 companies now committed. At the time of our last annual report, we were just slightly larger than South Africa in terms of the aggregated demand of our members at 228 terawatt hours per year. We're now starting to compete with Australia. We are the size of a significant country. This is why governments are taking note. So just linking back to Willem's presentation, 2028 is the average year for reaching 100% for our members. Givaudan ahead of the curve there, and already at 75%. So congratulations there. We're increasingly seeing companies achieving their 100% goals. So this is not just a pie in the sky goal, which it was maybe 5 years ago. Companies are making real, tangible progress, and companies are changing their laws to allow RE100 to happen. So I'll leave it there and move into the discussion.
Thank you, Sam and Willem. In the beginning of a journey, right, there's always the target setting. And so we saw Givaudan ahead of the curve, already quite progressed with sourcing renewable energy. So Willem, was it actually difficult to set a very ambitious target to become RE100 by 2025 and so early in the game? So what were the roadblocks, and how did you convince the management to actually buy into such an ambitious goal?
Thank you, Patrick. It's a good opening question. Well, it might surprise you a little bit, but in this specific situation, in fact, for Givaudan, the target setting was maybe the easiest part of the journey. Because as an industry leader, we have an heritage of leading by example and setting bold and ambitious goals, which is part a little bit of our DNA. But obviously setting targets is only the beginning of the journey. And then, you have obviously to deal with matrix organizations and many different stakeholders to align. So we set clear and transparent guidelines that if green energy is within a certain limit of budget, that people have the freedom to engage in leading this to the target, so they don't have to deal with too many obstacles. And above these limits, there's an escalation process in place that is very transparent, and where we make decisions of going forward and making long-term commitments. So my advice, for people who start this journey is to get also buy-in from the top and find positive support within the organization in order to make it work. As we all know, success leads to success, and you should not spend too much time with the naysayers. You should spend time with the positive supporters to make it acceleration.
Thank you, Willem. And maybe Sam on that topic. Well, I guess maybe you get called by CSO managers and they say, oh, why should I sign up for RE100? I mean, how can I convince my management, right? So, what main arguments for not joining RE100 do you hear from corporates, and what is your answer to that? Sam, please unmute.
We hear a range of reasons, and of course this is challenging for a CSR director to make the case often. And sometimes companies come and say, we want to join tomorrow, please. Where do we sign? And there are companies like Givaudan who go, look, we know this is challenging. We know it may be impossible right now, but we're gonna step up and make this possible. Other companies, other challenges. So you can't do it where we are. So, you hear this around the world, we're in geographies where you can't buy renewables. That's a known challenge that we can't do it. But most frequently here, look, we don't know how to do this is the biggest question. My answer to that is, look, setting 100% target is about making the impossible possible. Steve Howard of IKEA, our founder, put it very clearly: 100% leaves no room for doubt. There's no one in the company who's saying, including the CEO, who can say, this is nothing to do with me. I'm the, we've got a 50% target. I'm the 50% who doesn't need to worry about this. It leaves no room for doubt. You need to do this. You have to do it. Everybody is aligned behind that target. And that sees you through the easy times and the hard times to go, no, we're going to do this. It is difficult. It is an initiative for leaders, not just for any company. So, yeah. I'll talk about the geographic challenges later. I know there's a question on that. So, but yeah, it's really how we don't know how to do it. That's the point. Start the journey, find out how to do it, stay ahead of the curve, and make sure you're fit for the 21st century.
Oh, that's great. And maybe a question to that, right? So given you talked about COVID-19, right? So are we going to see a similar growth in PPA transactions as last year? We will not know. But then on I100 members, and I just saw a post from you yesterday, a new Japanese member just joined as well. So there is some traction, some new members as well this year. So what impact do you see on I100 members given the COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, and just in the last week, we've been joined by Ecolab, Amphantest, EMR Metals, Kering, who own Gucci, and TSMC, one of I think the 10th or 11th largest company in the world, semiconductor manufacturer, TSMC. That's in the last week. Things are really accelerating. So COVID doesn't appear to be having a huge impact on the growth of renewables. Companies are saying this is a long-term challenge, a long-term opportunity. So while we will inevitably see some supply chain disruption, people are anticipating a drop in supply chain challenges. Simply getting solar panels from China may be a problem this year. There may be a drop of around 10% in the anticipated growth of solar. There may be a drop in the anticipated growth of wind, but of all the energy industries, it's actually the renewables is the one that is continuing to grow. Everything else is contracting. So I think if you want to be onto a winner, renewables is the way to go during COVID.
Yeah, absolutely, and it just makes business sense, right?
Yeah.
CapEx goes down and OPEX is zero, so there is the case, right? So
Yeah.
maybe we started with targets, right? So maybe let's move towards like defining a strategy. And back to you, Willem. How did you develop a global energy strategy in a multinational corporation with various involved stakeholders, right? So you have operations globally, and you have to actually bring on board the global operations. How do you do that, and how do you manage it now to reach your 2025 goal?
Yeah. Obviously, we as a company, I just expressed the purpose, and the purpose is the guiding star in making all the decisions. And we want to be a company, be a force for good. And if you say that, many things fall into place, and people have nowhere else to go than doing well and follow these objectives going forward. Now, obviously, we as a company, we are very lucky, I think, because we have systems that also allows us to know what's going on. So, if you have 200 locations you operate from and you don't have an overview, it's obviously very difficult to set targets and to manage this over a timeline. So first, you have to understand what you're dealing with. You bring transparency. You set ambitious goals, but also realistic goals. So you don't go to shoot for the moon. We didn't say renewable energy, by 2018 when we launched in 2015. We gave ourselves time. We learned. We worked together with our partners, and we slowly ramped up. One thing I would say, the people that are involved with this, they get it. They are engaged and they work with you and they follow the timeline. A learning from this is maybe spend more time with the people who are not directly exposed to this. The financial people, the controllers, because they make budgets and then they say to the operational people, you have this budget and that's it. And then the operational people have to invest in green energy or more expensive certificates, and then you go into a negative spiral. So you have to avoid that, bring transparency, set clear target and realistic, and make it a common objective. You know, this is not only for the sustainability team, this is for everybody in the company. We want to be a force for good, and everybody has to contribute to that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Interesting, yeah. And then maybe on the implementation, to you, Sam, so what happens actually if an I100 signatory can buy renewables in some of the markets in which they operate, right? So we heard from Willem, if you buy certificates, that comes as a cost, but sometimes you can actually do, yeah, you can materialize some cost savings with on-site renewables or also off-site PPAs, but in some markets, it's just difficult. So what to do?
Yeah, in some markets it is difficult, in some markets it's impossible, which is why we exist. That's why RE100 exists as a campaign. This is not just virtue signaling for corporates, it's about creating genuine change. First of all, just reflecting on what Willem said, very wise words, set a realistic target. Don't rush in there with right, we're operating in Korea, Japan, and you know, a couple of other difficult geographies. Let's set a target of, you know, November 2020. Well, that would be challenging, but perhaps not the most sensible approach. Give it time for the policy to change. We have a number of Japanese companies have joined us, and the reason they joined, so 36 Japanese companies have now joined, including some huge Japanese companies, Aeon, Fujifilm, Fujitsu, and our first member, Ricoh. Many of those have targets that are 10 years and beyond, because they know that it's going to take time to change the Japanese system to make it actually practical to buy renewables at scale. Aeon uses around 1% of Japan's electricity. To buy at that scale is going to require economically viable solutions. And so what they're doing is sending that signal to the government. We want change to happen. They're actively working with the Japanese government to open up the market. So set realistic targets, and in the meantime, work towards opening up that market. Some companies do hit the buffers. You know, 5 years ago, you may have expected Korea to have opened up its market. It hasn't done yet. We've got companies ringing up saying, "Us, look, we're at 98%. We've got a 2020 target. What do we do?" So, well, you know, if a company has done its level best to achieve 100%, and they're not able to achieve 2% of that or 3% of that, whatever, because one of the markets they're operating in has been slow, we focus our attention on that market, not on criticizing the company for not quite achieving their 100% by the date they said. So, of course, if a company is only on 50% and they've not done a lot, that's a different story. But, you know, our focus is on changing markets and making this possible for everybody to buy renewables. So, yeah, if you're on 98% and you can't do it in Korea, well done. Let's keep going together.
Maybe that's also why you introduced the market boundary rule, right? To really kind of emphasize the local production of renewable energy, right?
Yeah, just because there's always been a market boundary rule in RE100. It's always been market based. We just re-emphasized that because there were some consultants that hadn't quite identified it, and as we expanded internationally, that requirement for clarity was there. But RE100 has always been market based, because what we want is to, you know, if you can't buy renewables in Korea, we don't want a situation where somebody goes, great, I'll just buy a bunch of cheap Norwegian RECs and count them towards my Korean consumption. There's no cable going between Norway and Korea. So we want to make sure that actually every market is developing its renewables portfolio.
So are RE100 companies actually on track to achieve their commitments? So the ones which have ambitious targets or already have targets in 2020, are they on track?
Yeah. So 3/4 of RE100 companies, including Givaudan, are on 75% or above. So yes, companies are on track to achieve 100%, and some of those who are slightly behind are behind by 1 or 2% due to difficult markets. They're making astounding progress. So we're really pleased by that.
Yeah, that's good effort. And we heard from Willem, right? End of 2019. 24 out of their 44 production sites are already 100% renewable, Willem, right? And then the question to you, how do you source renewable energy for those sites which are already 100% renewable? And are you actually planning to change the choice of renewable energy solutions in the future?
Yeah. Yes, it's interesting. You know, I think, as I said, it's a journey started in 2015, and many things changed in between, and probably many more things will change in the years to come. So initially, our main approach was to buy renewable certificates for on-site generation, but we also invested in solar power energy, you know, for on-site. But we want to extend this more on solar, and also to transform a little bit more to renewable, you know, PPA agreements, both on-site and off-site. For me, the certificates is a moving market, and it's not necessarily going in the right direction, where the PPAs seem to be a more attractive long-term agreements. Not being only in charge of sustainability, but also being the CPO, I'm sensitive to this. And, you know, we get now more and more, and Sam alluded to that, you know, the impact of COVID, we don't really know, but so far the market holds, and there are very interesting long-term deals to be made. And, you know, if you have business wants stability. So if you can make a 10-year agreement for a PPA in stability with an attractive price, these are things that are really appealing for companies. So definitely the direction to go. So this is the way we want to go. But you know, we want to have this stable pricing, and we probably will transfer more from certificates to PPA agreements to really make sure that we will make our 2025 commitments.
Yeah. And are you planning to have this as a kind of cost positive or cost neutral journey, actually? So is that the target, or you say, actually, I'm happy to have 100% renewable?
I think it's going to, well, I think it's going to be a cost positive impact, because, you know, as indicated, there's a slide from Sam, you know, these alternative sources, they become really attractive. So it's really perfect timing to transform your acquisition of renewable electricity and energy, you know, from these alternative sources. And you see, I'm now in the middle of negotiations for some long-term PPAs, and I am very excited about it, because you know, there is really significant capacity available. And buyers are really, there's a buyer's market. So, you know, I think that in addition to doing good and having a positive impact, we also can do well for the company economically. And I think this is a very important message for companies that join this journey now, is don't be afraid, be ambitious, and engage. This is not necessarily a win-lose situation. This is a win-win, potential win-win situation for everybody. So really attractive, and I expect a positive impact on all sides.
Yeah, and in even more exotic markets, for example, Vietnam, we see a PPA pilot where we currently work on. So even more exotic countries, they allow for PPAs now. So it's changing, and maybe not all of them for sure, but some of them, they will allow for some potential cost savings as well. Yeah, maybe one question more to you, Willem, and then we go back to Sam. Based on your experience so far with sourcing renewable energy for Givaudan, what were the main challenges so far? Especially when you touched the topic of PPAs and also challenging markets. So what were the main challenges for you at Givaudan? Yeah,
I think, you know, the main challenge for us today is really that there is not one solution that fits everything. The market is different in Europe than it's in the US. Whereas these are more unified markets, they are different. But then you go into Asia and Latin America, there is no unified approach. And there you have to a little bit more piecemeal. So I think what's very important is PPA is not the only solution. Every company has to look at their own requirements, their own footprint, and the different alternatives. And you know, it's not only PPA, it's solar, many different technologies and many different ways of doing things. So I think the challenge for me is, you know, there's not one global approach. So you still have to be opportunistic and also be sensitive to local incentives, you know, because there are also countries that offer local incentives. So you know, be savvy about that, and opportunistic. So it requires a little bit of digging and getting understanding, but definitely worthwhile and worthwhile investing in a good objective for long term.
Yeah.
An interesting challenge.
Sam, we heard it in your presentation, right? Renewable energy is becoming cheaper and cheaper, and even cheaper than coal now, even cheaper than operational coal power plants sometimes.
Yeah.
So what are the main barriers to mass uptake of renewables by corporates? So what are the main barriers?
Yeah, so I'd say the knowledge is a big barrier. A lot of companies are still unaware of the opportunity that renewables present. If they say we want to change our energy contract, they'll ring their broker. And I've been in conferences with energy brokers who have no idea that this opportunity exists. So that's one huge barrier. The second one is, you know, of course, some countries are not yet open for renewables. That's changing rapidly. And the reason for RE100 existing is to change that. A good example is that Japan makes some of the cheapest and best solar panels in the world. Yet, up until very recently, generating renewable electricity from solar in Japan using Japanese panels was significantly more expensive than doing so in the UK. That was entirely due to policy, connection costs, permitting, and bureaucratic barriers. That is changing rapidly, and companies are starting to reap the benefits of that. So yeah, the world is changing, but yeah, inability to buy renewables, but where it is possible, lack of knowledge of that ability. And again, we're looking to change that and empower companies to buy renewables where they are available.
Yeah. Maybe another question which relates a little bit to that. The energy market is also fast evolving. You mentioned it. I mentioned it also on Vietnam, for example. So what trends do you see, and how will this help corporates to accelerate the renewable energy procurement, right? So, I mean, in terms of market solutions, etc.
Yeah. So innovation in methods of buying renewables is happening all the time. One of the banks we work with is now offering a split PPA where you can buy parts of a PPA at different times of day and in different volumes at different times of day, which makes it a lot easier for companies to plan, and means they don't have to make such a long-term commitment. We're seeing technical innovations in battery storage and reduced cost in battery storage and renewables, etc., that allow companies to actually have almost 24/7 renewables and flex their financial models so they're not just energy consumers, but they're also acting as peak shavers, and all kind of interesting models happening. We're also seeing an increase in scale. 18 months ago, Google signed the first PPA in Taiwan at 10 megawatts. A few weeks ago, RE100 member TSMC signed the biggest PPA in the world at 920 megawatts. So that's almost 100-fold increase. 100-fold increase in the size of that project, size of project being signed up to in just 18 months. So things are moving incredibly quickly. And the message for companies is get on board with this, because things are changing rapidly. And companies like Givaudan, companies like Google, etc., who have teams that know how to deal with these new types of contracts, are able to just jump in and go, right, I will engage with you and do a deal. Whereas other companies are having to go, well, I'd love to engage, but I'll have to build a team over the next six months in order to be even in that game. So get on board. It's not just about the short-term cost savings. It's actually being in the game. This is an entirely new market.
Yeah. Thanks, Sam. Maybe we switch to before we run out of time. We have a couple of more minutes to check on the questions which have been asked from the participants. So maybe a question to both of you, or maybe more to Sam. So how can you push your suppliers to also adopt renewables? And if they don't do it, what would be the solution? Change suppliers? question mark. So I mean, we see, for example, Apple just published a report about their supplier engagement. That they're super active. They also want to engage with government, etc., to push towards regulatory changes as well, right? But in general, what can you do with your suppliers?
Well, first of all, have a look at our report that we produced a couple of years ago with BT, IKEA, and Apple on the RE100 website. That's re100.org, and the report section, report called Going Beyond, and that was the experience of Apple, BT, and IKEA and how they've been engaged in their supply chains. Now, things have moved on dramatically since then. The sophistication has improved, but the principles remain the same. Have a dialogue with your suppliers. Share experience with them in the benefits of buying renewables, and share knowledge on how they might do that. I think that the stick approach tends not to work, but engaging your suppliers is incredibly impactful. And Apple have now persuaded 66 of their suppliers to use 100% renewables for Apple products, and that has caused companies such as TSMC to take renewables really seriously and take a huge leap into going 100% renewable. So that's having created shockwaves around the world, with the Korean semiconductor industry going, oh, okay, we are now behind. How do we catch up with this? So engaging the supply chain takes it beyond the usual suspects, takes beyond those public-facing companies, and helps to mainstream the entire renewables movement.
And there's the client to learn from, right? So there's already someone who did it. So actually they can learn from them as well, right?
That's it. Apple have already set up an academy for their suppliers to share knowledge, and working. You don't have to do that individually. Working together, getting them to join RE100. Join the club. It's it's important. And suppliers are seeing advantages as well. And Ascol, one of our Japanese members, a stationary supplier, reported that joining RE100 was, they quote, their passport to the world. They actually gained customers by joining RE100, raising their profile. TCI, a small Taiwanese company who joined us, our first Taiwanese member, they've appeared on stage alongside Novartis and other huge companies because they joined RE100. It's really increased their profile. So
the world is anyway on a journey of reducing scope 3. Obviously, suppliers are part of the supply chain in scope 3. And there is no way of hiding or running away from it. So all together, we have this responsibility of limiting the increase of the temperature in the world, and suppliers have to align with this. So there's no way around it. So having a clear policy and then going together on a journey, like Sam said, reaching out and discussing together is the best way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Willem and Sam. All the other questions have been deleted. Means basically we have to close. We have to close the session. I get that. So maybe what final words would you like to share with the audience, Willem, before we close the session?
Well, as I said, set a clear strategy. It's important. Collaborate outside, but also inside. Work with organizations like yours, South Pole, RI100. They have the expertise to get you going and to set ambitious targets. Think big and don't be afraid. We need everybody to meet our global improvements of reducing the temperature of the world. And everybody is needed for that to contribute. So we will be on the journey together.
Inspiring words. And Sam? How about you?
I just really to echo that this current moment is a real sweet spot. There's still an opportunity to be a leader by setting 100% targets, but there's also a really strong evolving industry with great advice from companies like South Pole, an increasing level of supply and decreasing prices. So now it's a really great time to be joining the movement. Well, whether it's by joining RE100 or setting a lesser target, we would encourage you, jump in, both feet, set a 100% target. Let's get going on that journey together, because we're stronger. And it's through that aggregated voice of industry that we can create change in electricity markets and open this game up for everybody and really create those carbon reductions that we desperately need to do.
I can only second that. Thanks, Sam and Willem. It was great. A pleasure to have you in the panel. And then I will hand over to Anna. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Willem. Thank you, Sam and Patrick. Unfortunately, we have come to an end of this today broadcast. But before closing, I would like to share the poll results with you that you and your peers have been kindly answering over the past 2 days. We have had 160 respondents to the below questions. So the first question is, do you think that companies' long-term commitments to climate action will be compromised by the short-term focus on financial recovery from COVID-19? 60% of you answer yes, 30% answer no. Has your company developed and set a science-based target? 30% answer yes, it's in line with our 1.5 degree ambitions. 8% of you said yes, is set at below 2 degrees ambitions. 40% of you answer no, but we are currently reviewing our options, and 10% said no, and it's not something that is available at the present. The next question is, do you think the impacts of COVID-19 will have a negative impact on your net zero ambitions? And 38% of you answer yes, 62% answer no. And the final question was, which stakeholder group do you see as most important in achieving your net zero ambitions? 20% of you answer employees, 25% suppliers, 28% customers, 21% investors, 3% NGOs, and 4% others. And what a great day it's been. The Reuters events team and I will first like to thank all the speakers, sponsors, and partners for helping make this week possible. Your support throughout is very much appreciated. Thank you to all our listeners. I do hope we have provided you with some useful ideas to help you in the coming days, weeks, and months. Remember, our on-demand platform will be available for the next 2 weeks in case you have missed some of the sessions over the last 2-day broadcast. And finally, this virtual week is part of the knowledge exchange ahead of our flagship event, the Responsible Business Europe 2020, taking place on the 22nd and 23rd of October. We have limited speaking and sponsoring opportunities available, so get in contact with my colleague Matt at matt.buckingham@thomsonreuters.com. And that's it from us. Keep up the hard work, and remember, all of us play a part in helping deliver a new, clean, and inclusive future. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you.